Yeah, ギャル男宣言。
Go, 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 ギャル男宣言 Go, 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 ギャル男宣言 Go, 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 ギャル男宣言 Go, 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 go オス、俺ギャルを始めました PK 卒業パンツピタピタっていうか昨日も渋谷好きな食べ物はシーザーサラダガングロメッシュにからゴンレンズパラパラダンスの猛練習パラダイスに陶酔表現中ギャル男ステージ金じゃら銀じゃら銀ギラ銀マルキューセールは仁義なし全身バリバリやっぱり B3C SFO キノコを食べましたトランス聞きました調子上がってきたみんなが大好きだ
So when I posted my list of what I plan to review over the summer, a lot of items got attention. Panty and stocking was talked about a fair bit, and Lucky Star a couple times, and When They Cry too, including one guy who's been asking me to do it for over a year now. But there's one title that slipped by relatively unnoticed. Only one person even mentioned Legend of Duo, and it was only to ask, what the fuck is that?
Do you guys remember sticking around? Well, most of you probably don't because you're American, but any self-respecting Canadian kid, they loved sticking around back in the day.
Stickin' Around was a popular cartoon short centered around two obnoxious 9-year-olds, and it was drawn like somebody animated those doodles little kids make to show their parents, who politely smile and say, "It's beautiful, dear!" It eventually became a full-fledged show in its own right, but for a long time it was a series of 5-minute episodes that played in the space between two actual television shows. This type of thing was extremely common in the Western animation scene, specifically with shows that had a smaller budget, or when a network wanted to test a show out before investing in a full season.
Now, why am I mentioning this? Because this practice is explicitly Western with one very distinct exception.
And that's where the subject of today's review comes in. The Legend of Duo is a series consisting of 12 5-minute episodes that played on ATX Anime in between legitimate anime shows. The minute I heard of it, two things immediately popped into my head. One, that I had to at least give it a shot because I'd never even heard of an anime that's done this sort of thing, and two, that it's most likely going to suck two round, hairy, low-hanging balls.
And suck it did, my friends. Suck it did.
The first thing you'll notice when you start it up is, while the art is actually quite good, the animation itself isn't. Let me explain. Check out this still. It's pretty obvious that the art, while generic, holds its own in terms of detail and quality against efforts from actual anime shows. But then you begin to notice little things, like how half the time there's only 2 frames of animation for an eye blinking or a mouth moving, and then the show starts to take on a really cheap feel. Sometimes it makes me feel like I'm playing a Japanese visual novel from the pre-2000 days. Everything seems so rigid and plasticky, and it's really distracting. Sometimes things aren't even animated at all. They use weird, disorienting zoom effects or just have an image awkwardly slide or swerve across the screen. What the hell is this? Was this show animated in Flash? The music is also nothing to write home about. There's no opening or ending themes, which makes sense for a show this size. But the entire soundtrack is a bland mix of meaty synth tracks that half the time don't even fit the scene they're in. It's pretty clear they just made a half-dozen songs to cover the basic range of emotional tones they wanted, but when a scene demands something more nuanced, the music just ends up being off-putting rather than complimentary. The star of the show is a vampire named Jiga, who seems to be a weird cross between Zex Marquis and Alucard. The eponymous duo is the deuteragonist, whose past intertwines with Jigs pretty extensively. Other characters include a half-vampire Lloyd Irving / Bosch the Stampede clone named Stefan, and the obligatory vampire hunter Lizzie. Lizzie. And believe it or not, this is an entirely Sausage Fest cast. Yeah, Duo is a guy. Considering his character design as voice actor, I honestly couldn't tell until about halfway in, until somebody actually uses the pronoun he to refer to him. Why must you always do this to me, Japan?
You know, seriously, it doesn't need to be this way. Guys with long hair, they can look male. Guys with feminine features can look male. Is there any reason for this guy to look like a girl? I mean, he's not transgender, so why draw him that way?
Anyway, I know I gave pretty bland descriptions of these characters, but that's all we get. Each character is ultimately a one-trick pony. Stefan is a light-hearted comic relief whose only real tension comes from the fact that he's a half-blood and has to learn to control his urges. The vampire hunter is a Captain Ahab type, hunting down all vampires, whether they're evil or not, with racial/religious purity being his only motivation. Giga is the moral vampire who believes that humans are worth saving, and Duo is the ascended vampire who believes humans are an inferior species. These are the only real character traits given to these people, and absolutely everything they do is by the book. Regarding the plot, it seems like the creators of The Legend of Duo had this massive grand storyline in mind, but really ended up biting off more than they could chew, and it shows. The main setting is a post-apocalyptic Earth where civilization and most of humanity have been wiped out. Now, it's never explicitly stated what caused the cataclysm, but it's implied that nuclear war was involved. On top of that, the remnants of humanity have been dealing with something called the disease of death, which randomly infects people for no reason at all and ages them about 100 years in the space of 5 seconds. Or it might just really dehydrate them, I'm not sure. Oh, and on top of that, it turns out that the classical European interpretations of vampires are real. And as all of these things come to a head, they don't really have the time to develop anything, so the show turns into a massive clusterfuck of plot threads mentioned once and never seen again. The one real surprise of the show is how the vampires are treated by their human counterparts. In most vampire tales, there's two main reactions humans have to vampires. There's fear and revulsion, meaning they don't want to be killed or turned into a vampire and are afraid of them, or defensively fight them, or even preemptively attack them. And then there's attraction, where they're others seduced by the vampire unwittingly and are caught. They willingly give themselves up in a very sexual fashion, or they fall in love and then a taboo-based storyline develops. But in Legend of Duo, vampires are treated by the humans as a resource to exploit. Pretty much every single human left on Earth desperately wants to be a vampire because the immortality vampirism provides is a bulwark against the disease that causes death. And for reasons that are never really explained, vampires have stopped feeding on or turning humans. So when a human sees a vampire, they think to themselves, if I can kill this guy and infect himself with his blood, I'll be a vampire too! And often haphazardly attacks, despite the vampire being significantly stronger.
I have to hand it to them. This is a pretty unique take on a tired story, but it's the only thing that Legend of Duo actually does differently. Is it enough to carry the show? No, at least not in the way that they do it. It's got potential, but it's more like a distraction for about 5 seconds before you simply move on.
The main conflict stems from a time before the bombs fell, when Duo first turned Giga into a vampire. Now, as mentioned before, vampires don't turn humans anymore due to some vaguely defined, barely mentioned moral code except for Duo, who doesn't give a shit. In the present, however, Giga and Duo are constantly crossing paths and having little duels and discussions over the issue that don't really amount to anything. Stefan enters the picture for a bit, has a 30-second flashback to his time as a student, deals with vampiric bloodlust once with Jiga's help, and then fades into the background. And the vampire hunter walks around the wasteland, occasionally killing nameless vampires before having a duel with Giga at the end for no reason. They try their best to develop all these things, they really do, but they don't have the time or budget for it. And at the end of each episode, you're almost always left asking the question, why should I care? Legend of Duo never gives a satisfactory answer. The show ends with Duo and Giga finally facing off, Duo becoming mortally wounded and Giga carrying him off. Now, just to clarify, when I first watched Legend of Duo, I did it with a friend. And while he picked up on the whole Duo being male thing, I missed it. Sort of. I didn't see the first gender confirmation scene and just refused to believe it was true. And later on, I just thought it was some subtitle mistake or something. So watching the ending was actually quite interesting for the both of us.
Come on, dude, they're obviously both guys. I don't see how you haven't accepted this yet.
No way. Look at Duo. She's got the figure, the voice actress, everything. Jig and Duo are even in love. See, it says right there.
You know, it can still be a story about two dudes, right? Like, two guys can still be in love.
No way. I still think she's a girl.
Are you seriously gonna argue this?
Now here's the weird thing. Until I finally noticed that Duo was just a really girly guy and that the story was actually about a developing love between these two dudes, I was about ready to peg Legend of Duo as a pretty shitty attempt overall. The music's bad, the animation is woefully underfunded, the characters are stereotypical, and the plot is way too ambitious. But when I discovered this was a love story between two guys rather than a guy and a girl, my first knee-jerk reaction was to bump up the rating considerably. After all, you can give extra artistic merit to a narrative that tries to tackle unpopular social issues, and I thought that if I rewatched Legend of Duo with a specific mindset that it was a gay love story, maybe I would pick up on little hints or sly references that I missed the first time around.
But the music was still bad, the artwork was still choppy, and the plot was still underdeveloped. Guess I should have seen that coming.
The anime ends with Jiga and Duo disappearing and this Wesker-looking guy appearing for 5 seconds. It's obvious sequel bait, but nothing ever came of it. There was never a second bundle of shorts made, and Legend of Duo was never developed into a full-fledged show. Overall, The Legend of Duo is an interesting quirk of Japanese animation. It really seems like if the production crew had been given a full budget and a regular time slot, this could have blossomed into a decent, or dare I say it, good show. But as it stands now, it's just mindless to watch. It might have even been a quality series of shorts too if they cut out 90% of the extraneous plot that was clearly there just to show the network what they could do with the concept had they decided to pick the show. But they didn't, and we're ultimately left with a final product that is woefully underwhelming. It might seem like Legend of Duo gained some depth from it being a homosexual romance at its core, but this one tidbit of information can't override the show's many technical faults. I'd still recommend you watch it, if only because the entire series takes just under an hour to complete, but expect to be more amused by the hilariously bad animation than moved by the bloated plot.
Jiga and Duo are even in love. See, it says right there.
You know, they can still be two guys, you know. Like, they can be gay. They can be homos. In the ass.